So I'm humbled by the invitation because I rarely get the chance to talk to scholars of the humanities, in the humanities, and the eminent Girardian scholars like yourselves. René Girard is an icon in your communities. You have already developed a language, a scholarly language around his ideas and your contributions and enrichment of these ideas. But you will forgive me if I'm not sharing the idiom. I have been familiar with these ideas in search for a theory of mind. Because one of the big and important problems in AI is that we don't really have a theory of mind. Of course, AI for me is something that grew out of a practical necessity. Back in the 1980s, I was a young electrical engineer working for instrumentation control systems in nuclear power plants. And at that time, right after the 3 Mile incident, there was a huge growth in instruments. They put a lot more, from about 800 to 900 instruments in a power plant. The number grew to about 5 to 6, sometimes 10,000. And soon it was discovered that they had the engineers of the plants had to spend a lot more attention to the relation between the instrumentation technicians and engineers and the instruments, because the instruments were failing. These plants were, giving a lot of false representations, mathematical or technical representations of their state of safety because of the instrumentation problems. So that's how I turned into AI. From practical problems with instrumentation control systems. It was an era where expert systems were coming online, and some of my background in systems and control theories and so forth, and of course some of my background in the Greek culture where I grew up, where engineers Greece is producing some of the finest engineers in the world, but they're all supposed to be broad thinkers. And so we're not shy to learn about things outside of the technical narrow domains. So that's where I stand from. That's what I was led to. Of course, I went back after working in industry to do a PhD, and I was fortunate to have luminaries like Zadeh and Robert Burig, Professor Raghib from Illinois, a lot of Tom Sheridan from MIT. These are all people who looked at the man-machine relation from the point of view of the reliability and the performance and the actual good workings of very elaborate technical systems such as nuclear power reactors. So it was in search of a theory of mind. And I think the mimetic theory is essentially a theory of mind. It's not the only one. We don't have a universal theory of mind, but mimetic theory is about the closest I have come to. It explains a lot of things. You can embed in it a lot of our systems ideas. You can receive tremendous explanatory power. It has tremendous explanatory capacity. And along with things such as Carl Friston's least energy principle, a lot of the work in epistemology, a lot of the work that was done by the cyberneticians back in the 60s and 70s. That was the popular sort of phrase for AI amongst the Europeans and the European system scientists. So that's sort of the where I stand and how I got to where I stand. And again, with apologies for not sharing the idiom and the language of the Girardian scholars, the great Girardian scholars, I will proceed with my today's presentation, which is really, I'd like to think of it as an invitation for discussions, since you were so kind to include me, to invite me in your community. In spite of their differences, AI and machine learning they're basically facets of the same technologies, scientific sort of accomplishment, and they represent signature technologies of our era, although they're pretty old, they go back in the 50s. Taken together, we think of them as intelligent systems, that is, desirable technologies, the possession of which makes countries stronger, economies bigger, our cities safer, our data more secure, and ourselves smarter, healthier, and wealthier and richer. We all desire to have some, more, or all of these things. And the more we hear, talk, and see of them, the more we desire them, and so does all that can see and feel our desires. If this does not raise mimetic desire, what does? Is the mimesis an attempt to construct a better version of us, or is it an effort to imitate God? Intelligent systems can be thought of as the totality of the particulars of computers which are more flexible, more adaptive, self-adjusting, and generally fancier than previous ones. They represent ambitions for capturing not only the logic, but also the magic of the mind. Nowadays, we have AI that composes poetry in the style of Shakespeare, or paintings in the style of Van Gogh. From a technical perspective, robotics, the Internet of Things, the electrification of transportation, but also video games and education, medicine, energy, all are expected to include growing AI and machine learning content. For consumers, AI, it's about the seductive mysteries of the mind embedded in desirable products. AI promises products with personality. The soul in the machine might be finally here. We can love even more what we own, what we buy, what we own, as they are endowed with a mind to serve obediently and always following etiquette and protocol. Smarter cars with AI and ML can take you there without you driving, and smarter devices can monitor our health and tell us when to go to the doctor without us feeling sick or before feeling sick. For companies, it's about innovation. AI and machine learning shorten development cycles from conceptual design to markets. For political entrepreneurs and politicians, AI and ML are the latest tools for listening to and maybe even whispering messages that can make a difference in public sentiment, be it an election, possible unrest, or even popular insurrections. In mimetic theory, Girard established the connections between violence and religion, mimetic desire, scapegoating, and revelation. They form what the engineers call a closed loop. Imitation leads to rivalry, and humans perfectly capable and willing to destroy each other resort to scapegoating and revelation to protect society from total destruction. And I take here revelation in the broader sense that Girard uses it, which is also sort of what history reveals to us. It's sort of the apocalypse. At some point, Girard does say that history is revelation. AI is all about mimesis, and as such, it is relatively easy to establish a desire, scapegoating, and revelation loop. To begin with, AI is not really some intrinsic property of machines. Let's say something like electric current and voltage, weight, volume, number of components, etc. We can think of AI as the Girardian mediator. It's the medium. It's really that we use for modeling the desires of others. It is a medium through which we can model desires, of course, the desires of others. And with big data in the picture, we can actually model the desires of millions of others with whom we need not have direct contact. We don't even need to observe them. All we need to know is that they desire something. unlike other artifacts, AI is endowed with some kind of memory and some kind of foresight. I use the modifier some kind because it is really about the mental construction of the observer, the human which looks at others through some kind of interactive screen, a virtual mediator, so to speak, a virtual interlocutor, the one that Girard calls model. We can think of AI, therefore, as a mirror with memory and foresight. AI evolved out of the audacious 1950 hypothesis of Alan Turing that machines can think. Turing proposed a test for machine intelligence, the famous Turing Test, which he uncannily called imitation game. Like Girard, Turing identifies a triadic relation for the game: an evaluator, a human, and a machine. The evaluator communicates with the human and the machine through a text-only channel. He cannot really see them, and that's important because it really gets a lot closer to Girardian theory of mind. The evaluator communicates through a text-only channel with both the machine and the human. If he can't distinguish the machine from the human, the machine is said to have passed the test, the Turing test, and should be considered as smart as the human. This is the early phase, what I call the phase one in the growth and evolution of AI. Its dominant aim is for machines to act like humans in the sense of the Turing test that I just described. But the question then is, but what produces human action? Then comes phase two of AI, where its principal aim is for machines to think like humans, not to act alone, but to think like humans. This was a period focused on symbolic systems and translating in logical terms. That is, this is a period where we have heuristics and algorithms written as if then rules, and try to encode human knowledge and expertise. Sometimes they're called expert systems. Sometimes they use fuzzy rules where fuzziness allows some control over the parsimony of these algorithms in the sense that we can categorize the important variables in a small but overlapping number of categories and get some control over the economy of these efforts, both from a technical computational point of view, but also representational. And there's a lot of huge body of literature around this human knowledge and expertise captured in these systems. The most famous of these efforts was the Japanese fifth generation project in the 1980s, which of course drew multi-billion-dollar investments for logic-based software environments like Prolog, and for accommodating, for related accommodating hardware platforms. I had the privilege of spending a sabbatical in Japan in the early 90s, working on sort of similar ideas for nuclear reactors and other systems. And it was an exciting time. The Japanese really, we owe a lot to the Japanese methodical and rational approach to this think like humans machines. But why is human thought an ideal to aim for? We all know that it's so incomplete, and so we all know that the irrational is there in human thinking. So phase three was focused on thinking rationally, not just think like humans as it was phase two with its expert systems. And here, rationality calls for what the systems people describe as a utility function, which is needed to capture rationality, to allow for some kind of prioritization, for preferences, and for ordinary relations. And so we go back to the notion of Occam's razor, for parsimony as a criterion for rationality. But of course, what good is rational thought if it does not affect the world in some positive way? So we come to phase two of AI, which focuses on acting rationally, not just thinking. And here we have what we call intelligent agents. And these intelligent agents are pieces of software which are endowed with autonomy, with collaborative capacities. They can negotiate and decide for actions through rational thinking, which is logical, but most importantly, their thinking is modified by the consequences of their own actions. So they are capable of learning, of what we call learning in engineering. And unlike humans, machines can be made to learn from their own mistakes. So that's a significant difference. Of course, the range of learning we're talking about is technically defined, it's different, it's more narrow, it maybe doesn't have the depth of learning that we develop through Zerarbian theory of mimesis. So this situation is depicted, and I will just, if you indulge with me, I will make the sophisticated technical step here to share with you this share. So we go from act like human in the lower left quadrant in the 50s, think like human in the 70s and 80s, think rationally, which is to develop some utility functions, and learning now comes in the picture. It was one of the principal accusations against neural computing back in the 60s to accuse them that there were not really universal computing machines because there were limitations in learning. But that problem was solved in the late 70s and the 80s. There was neural methods came back with a vengeance for learning, and now we have deep learning and all kinds of things in AI. But eventually, we want to act rationally, and that means to be able to learn from mistakes, from the consequences of actions. So let me then get back to the sorry. Let me get back. So this going from Turing phase 1 to phase 4 is an evolutionary process, because the hardware changed, the algorithms changed, our knowledge about what human thinking is changed. In many ways, we can think of this sort of journey as taking us from the kind of technological optimism that characterized the 50s. It was an age of discovery, and a lot of this hyperbole, begin to be constrained, to be limited on the one hand by our ignorance about language, about semantics. On the other hand, greater capacities for hardware and for methodological advancements. So we hit the wall, and then the wall starts moving, and we can build a new wall. And it should be noted that in each of these phases, each phase begins into the next one through a process of growth and evolution, various important characteristics, which are then retained and subsumed into the new phases. Now, can AI escalate rivalry towards a war of all against all if it is a mediator? Well, this is indeed, it seems to be happening already. And I'll give some examples, and these are anecdotal, but I think it's to describe, to convey the gist of the ideas. I had the privilege of visiting China several times, and many brilliant Chinese students we have had here at Purdue over the years, and wonderful scholars. They're telling us that Chinese youth which is probably one of the most tech-savvy people on earth, they become much more agitated is maybe the wrong word, but this growth of nationalistic sentiments amongst the Chinese youth, to the point where they're far more radical than anyone at the top. The public sentiment driven by youth, and there's a culture for that in China, and I understand there are cultural factors. We had the Cultural Revolution after all there, but the youth is far more excitable. They push for action against the others, where the others include the wretched foreigners that humiliated China in the past, or at least that's how it is perceived. And of course, they include almost all of China's neighbors, the European, the American imperialists, and so forth. So we see their AI and the digitization of social media and so forth generating a lot more excitement about the others, something that strikes to the scapegoating element of the closed loop of Girard. Similar patterns are, of course, observed in many places, including the US, and I think there's no more graphical illustration for this than the events in Washington, D.C. this year in January 6th, when the mob tried to enter and maybe did enter the Capitol building. We can see the same sort of thing in the so-called color revolutions, which produced spasms of social protest in many countries around the world. The Arab revolutions, the Arab social, that started in Tunisia, the Arab Spring. We can see more of these things, and of course, they may be more spontaneous than organized by agents provocateurs of other countries and so forth, as is typically the perception of the domestic governments and regimes who may be threatened by this kind of phenomena. Certainly, rival states may stand to benefit from actions that weaken their opponents, delegitimize trust and confidence on institutions and orders, but they may be less causal than thought of. We may actually be witnessing escalation made possible by AI as a mediator. According to Girard, the primary means for avoiding total escalation is the scapegoat mechanism. Conflict is resolved by uniting against the other, who is blamed for the chaos. And we see elements of this in the various wars against this or the other. And we could include the Cold War, the War on Terror, the New Cold War, etc. But unlike in the past, conflict amongst nuclear-armed states is unthinkable. We are in the post-atomic age. And hence, the guilty party cannot really be eliminated in a way that would have been possible before 1945. The conflict cannot end through these old means of war, and peace and social order cannot be restored in the world community. However, attempts are made to form consensus against the truly guilty or dangerous others, like the jihadist of ISIS. Although incapable of developing the internet and its technologies, they are perfectly capable of using it to showcase their barbarous decapitations. Yet, AI can boost proxy wars and give relatively poor armed groups a lot more leverage in using inexpensive technologies like drones and missiles come shells. You can more or less modify shells and turn them into missiles and guide them with the optical, and you don't have to have satellites to guide them. You can feed them data and use some AI programs to hone on the targets. And AI can undermine safeguards of non-proliferation, making weapons of mass destruction more likely to fall into wrong hands. So we can go to the nightmare scenario of nuclear weapons, chemical, biochemical, biological, and so forth, falling into the wrong hands. AI is the choice technology for cyber attacks, technology theft, compromising non-proliferation, and engaging in unimaginable until recently state, industrial, or private-sponsored espionage activities. The potential of AI for nefarious escalation of violence leading to global chaos and collapse should not be underestimated. Yet, pervasive action on data and information that gets summarized into features, categories, patterns, and trends can also become the basis of a new soteriology. I use the word carefully, and I don't have to explain it in this group. The strive for a non-violent society. Girard puts the center of gravity of violence on the individual, not on the institutions, as has been sort of the false reading of the Enlightenment. So there is hope here. In reaching out for the desires of others through AI, humans have also the great potential to acknowledge the innocence of the victims and promote a new universal creed that focuses on the custodianship of our great global commons. And I put this as a proposal out. To begin with, in relation to the planetary climate, global efforts to achieve net zero by 2050 cannot succeed without strong and flourishing AI. Then, in relation to the oceans of the world, this is the other great global commons that we all use. AI can effectively monitor not only life and the ecology of the great masses of water that make our planet look like a blue dot from outer space, it can help ensure freedom, safety, and security of navigation for all. Finally, in relation to airspace, space, and certainly cyberspace, also great global commons, the optimal, safe, and fair use of which can be greatly boosted through AI. And in all this, we can add a global infrastructure for fundamental rights, democratic processes, and the rule of law. How can AI provide the enabling means of a new soteriology around the global commons, for instance? Well, it remains to be seen. But what can give us some comfort is that we might have been there before. So consider the year 204 before Christ era. So we're talking about some time ago. Let me grab a picture here again and show for you this artifact. This is the Antikythera mechanism. It's a mechanical computer. You could predict solar and lunar eclipses for thousands of years ahead, down to the hour. And they were manufactured. We have evidence that they were manufactured. They were not just one, and there were probably hundreds, thousands of those. They were manufactured in Epirus, in today's northwestern Greece, with some components from Rhodes. You can see this is really a machine that was very sophisticated. It embedded, it had in it the finest principles of Euclidean geometry and Ptolemaic astronomy, and used a language that is a computing system of gears and levers to translate the scientific principles into actionable decision making. It was also useful for navigation. We had an astrolabe, etc. But it was more or less a common sort of thing to want to know when some certain future Olympics would be, or the Nemean Games, etc. You could just adjust the levers and find the answers. The Antikythera mechanism would promptly provide answers to such questions, and of course, a lot more. The mechanism was found in the early 1900s in the bottom of the Aegean Sea near the island of Antikythera. It has its names. It took over a century of research and some significant advancements in X-ray imaging and neutron tomography to be able to look at its insides and decipher its absolutely marvelous workings. Still, some of its functions remain to be discovered, and some great teams of scientists are working on it. And so I bring this as an example of the effort to encode and mechanize human thinking, which is really ancient business. Doing it through AI is just a more recent venture. But I bring it to turn your attention to another point. With all its scientific and technological sophistication, the Hellenistic world slowly eroded and disappeared although somewhat survived into the world order, the set of institutions that Rome built, and essentially in the Byzantine, in the Eastern Roman Empire. Eventually, Rome, unable to confront the relentless invasions of the nomads of the Great Steppe, appears to have received and, albeit reluctantly, accepted the grandest innovation of all, the Gospels. So please don't accuse me of heresies. I don't equate the Gospels with mechanistic things, but I want to take us back to Girard and open the discussion shortly. The Gospels reveal and proclaim once and for all the innocence of the victims. They take the center of gravity to the tomb, as Girard said, to death. They bring death in the center of the ideology, the religion, the public discourse, whatever you want to call it. And that's significant because this great revelation enabled the Byzantines to develop a highly sophisticated strategic culture that placed primacy in the institutional innovations of an apostolic creed, something that would be constructed by dialogue, by synods, by debates. And through that, they were able to turn the endless bouts of escalating violence into stable patterns of redemption and salvation. So we can go into this later, but remember the western part of the empire was the secure and stable. The eastern part was the vulnerable. The administrative division between east and west was supposed to be done in order to protect the eastern part. Well, the western part collapsed to the barbarians much faster than the eastern part, and a lot of that was because the Byzantines were able to use this apostolic creed to appeal to the Khazars and the Huns and the Russian Kievs, the Kiev Rus, and all the great peoples of the steppe that to some significant degree became members of they were included in the Eastern Roman Empire. So Christian soteriology was eminently successful in drawing in the peoples of the steppe in a Byzantine world order that survived for almost 1,000 years, at least 800 years, which is longer than any state in history. So let me come to the closure and hopefully open some discussion after that. I'd like to close with a parable. It comes from Jerome Kagan's Three Seductive Ideas book. There was a kingdom whose king one day decided to collect and study all the books in his kingdom, in his realm. He asked his the scholars in his court, to collect copies of all books and almost fill his palace with them, and then spend years and years studying them together with his courtiers and scholars. One day, he asked them to take all that knowledge in the books and put it in one book of about 600 pages. And the scholars obliged, and after they spent great time and effort, they put it all in one book. But the king had one more challenge for them. He asked them to take everything that was in that book, that contained the thousands of books in his realm, and summarize it in one page. And the scholars obliged again, and so they did. They summarized it in one page. And finally, he threw one more challenge. He asked him to take that one page and condense it in one word. And so I'd like to open the discussion by asking you, some of you may already know because you've read Kagan's wonderful book, what the word may be. Thank you. So we can. Professor Woodcock, you're muted. You're muted.
Thank you, Professor Tsoukalas. Thank you. At this point, I think we will turn to Mark Ansbach, and he will make a response, and then we will engage in this discussion that you have opened for us so marvelously. Thank you very much, Mark. Yeah.
Well, it's a daunting task to respond to a lecture so densely packed with ideas. Professor Tsoukalas, I feel a bit like the scholars in your parable when they were asked to boil a whole library to a single page, if not a single word. After giving us an overview of the place of AI in today's economy and politics and a historical schema for understanding AI's evolution, you concluded with a schema for understanding the trajectory of Western history from the demise of ancient Greece and Rome to the rise of the Byzantine Empire, a schema that integrates the roles of both technology and religion. As I understand it, you are saying that machines have immense strategic value, but machines alone are not enough. When mechanical prowess failed to ensure the continuing primacy of Western civilization, Christian revelation stepped in to fill the gap. Christian revelation itself had strategic value. It was itself a kind of technical innovation. Now, you said you did not want to imply that the Gospels are mechanistic things, but I think your observations about the Gospels are quite consistent with René Girard's idea that the Gospels and the Bible in general represented a kind of epistemological revolution that itself paved the way in turn for a new scientific age. So I like the idea that religion is a toolbox. Religion is not just about belief. Religion is a toolbox with practical value. It is a way to mediate human relationships. And you argue that AI, like religion, is also a mediating mechanism. And I hope I'm not going too far here. It seemed to me that there were hints in your lecture that AI itself may be a kind of new religion. And like religion, like mimesis, it is ambivalent. AI is a tool that can be put to good or bad ends. It has the potential to escalate violence, but it might also just help us save ourselves. So I want to raise a question, a very broad and in a sense, a question that I suspect is on many people's minds, which is whether artificial intelligence could ever become something more than an artifice and could actually become real intelligence. Machines can imitate human intelligence, but can they develop consciousness? Can they develop something like the human spirit? You referred to AI's ambition to capture the magic of mind and to deliver the soul in the machine. But you also seem to hint, if I'm not mistaken, that this may be an illusion. A key idea in your lecture is that AI is not an intrinsic property of machines. Rather, it is a mediator between ourselves and other people. It is, you said, the Girardian mediator. And we know that the individual who looks at the Girardian mediator or model projects onto it a transcendent essence that is not there. Are the dreams of a transcendent artificial intelligence that could surpass humanity a romantic illusion in Girard's sense. And the other side of the coin, the fears that our computers or robots will one day defy us and take over the world. Is that not perhaps a displacement of the human violence concealed behind the mechanical mediator? So I wonder if you could comment on that.
Thank you, Professor Ansbach. Thank you for the kind words. The idea that the Byzantines turned to the Gospels, the Roman order, which was severely challenged, as you know, from the invading nomads, but also from pandemics, in the time of Justinian, half the population of Constantinople perished from a pandemic, the plague. The idea that these mechanisms, these wonderful inventions of the Hellenistic era, like the Antikythera mechanism, we don't have many of those. In fact, we have some astrolabs. They did not survive, and this particular one survived because it was just part of a shipwreck. It was, in the bottom of the Aegean Sea, and the reason they did not survive, although it's reasonable to assume because they were manufactured that there were thousands, probably tens of thousands of them. The reason they did not survive is because for the invading barbarians like the Arulians who sacked Athens here almost 1900 years ago, these mechanisms were just scrap metal. They didn't care about solar and lunar eclipses or the Olympic Games and this kind of course. They were scrap metal, useful for their weapons and their household needs or whatever they were. So they did not survive. So science and technology represents wonderful innovations of the human mind, but unless they are in a stable society, a resilient social order, they have no value. Because they're fundamentally mediating human relations, and so is AI in a more proper. It has this technical mystique, which is wonderful because we can get students to be enticed into studying it. We can get companies to be investing money. It has all these wonderful things that stimulate our imaginations, and we can think of the great, romantic, if you wish, suppositions or fantasies that they will take over. They can become, dangerous, and they are dangerous when they fail, of course, right? We can think of all this, but all of this goes once the societal structure that allows our institutions for education, for entertainment, for innovation, etc., is not there. So the Byzantines, brilliant as they were, they took to the toolbox of the Greeks, and they took the Hebrew stories, and they said, okay, here, let's get everybody to think of death as the beginning of the afterlife. And so they went to the Khazars and the Mongolic tribes north of the Danube, and there was one after the other, there was no end to them. And they said, look, you come here, we have pastures for your horses and villages for your wives and children and the elderly, and there will be churches in these villages, and the leaders can come to Constantinople and see Hagia Sophia, and you really have to prepare for eternal life, for salvation, right? So this soteriology was fundamentally the sense of the victims. What Girard calls Jesus' sacrifice was different from Dionysius or from Oedipus. Because he's innocent. So in that sense, he's anybody, everybody. It could be, from Ulaanbaatar. He could have come from any, cold corner of the steppe. So this was a universal message, and it was inclusive, and it focused on death. So sacrificial death, it was just a waste, right? It was a waste. It just calmed down. Maybe I gave the Byzantines a short sense of a reprieve, but it did not end the incoming, threats from the north, from the east, from the south. And so this innovation, the social, the ideological, the religious innovation is what saved the world order of the Eastern Roman Empire. And after all, they had to do this economically. I mean, they couldn't really, unlike the Western Roman Empire, where the Roman tradition is to raise huge armies and put down, the threatening barbaric sort of invaders from north of the Rhine. The Byzantines couldn't afford, they didn't have the resources, they didn't have the geography, they didn't have, they were already enfeebled and weakened, but they became far more effective in the social innovations, in bringing the gospel in the message of salvation, this soteriology and the eschatology of the Orthodox, of the Christian faith. So it worked to preserve that order and to make it far more resilient that we have seen in the Western part. So this is what I think AI could be extremely useful, and it would be a soteriology not to dismiss all the possibilities that people imagine, because some of these possibilities can become actualities, but it can contribute to the resilience of humanity on a scale that it won't be a religion, but the purpose of making our global commons survive, and therefore our ecology and our world survive. AI could have a very, very pivotal role for that. So this is sort of the message, and I want to pick on the story. And the story is the parable about the books. Anybody has any suggestion? I cannot read very well the comments from here, largely because
there are some responses, but I know the answer because you told me, but I don't want to say it unless you want me to. But I can observe that there are at least two different lines of thinking in the questions that have been coming up. One line is the question of possibility. Can an AI think possibility?
Okay. Yes. So Sandy, allow me to answer this through, because I want to get to the answer. I want answers to these questions through this parable. At the moment, no AI program can read a page and create a summary. Now, we have a lot of techniques and algorithms for taking keywords and doing a kind of annotation of things within a certain domain, but summarization is a problem that no AI program can do it. And not just the scholars of the king, kids in elementary school can do summarization, right? So no summarization is possible. And a lot of it has to do with these possibilities, the semantics of state, the one that gives meaning. So culture, as in a Girardian sense, is a infrastructure for maintaining order, for maintaining peace and harmony in society, or at least making sure we don't all kill each other.
Right. Yeah.
So culture and religion as part of it is not just the antidote, it's not just a safeguard for this violence that comes out of the mimetic nature of human beings, of the individual. Culture is also an infrastructure for semantics, for generating meanings, for making words, for making computing systems, be meaningful. So at the moment is and summarization is a key benchmark for these semantic, computations. At the moment, no AI system can do it. They deal with possibilities, but they seem to be more like these mediators. They seem to be more like the, mirror with the medium, the interface. AI, properly speaking, and increasingly so in the future, will become part of social science, not the, informatics and computer science. Or computer science will become more and more social science because of AI. The other thing I want to say about this is the following. So we can now, as with AI as the mediator, we can see and feel the desires of millions of others. And in a way, that sort of washes away, in the sense that, if the desires of millions of others, marketeers can make good things to promote, but if the desires of millions of others are there, these desires may not have lasting, impression. They may not be driving us to escalation, as individuals. So this washing away effect, is also one of the promising things about creating new soteriologies, so to speak, through AI, through this connectivity that AI enables amongst humans. I don't know if I answered the question, but this is the thoughts that I got. But still, the question for everybody: what would be the word that the scholars gave for the executive summary of all this, of the book, which was the summary of all these books?
One word that has been put forward in the question and answer session is the word love. You may want to respond to that.
Right.
Is the word
so
love.
Love is, love is the Gerardian. So this Christian soteriology says that, forget about destruction, because it's all pointless, because we're all going to die. The barbarians, the non-barbarians. So why don't you come in and become also become, a Christian or whatever, say, because the soul has to be saved. How we do this? By turning by modulating, by suppressing the escalating violence through love as the ultimate value that regulates our social conduct. So that love is indeed an important word, but it's not the word.
It's not the word, right?
It's not the word.
It's not the word.
Right.
Shall we continue to take guesses on what the word is?
Yes, I see the other. Yes, the subjectivity of the other, right? That's really also a Gerardian idea, right? And that's love, and acceptance and inclusion. Of course, Gerard himself talks about the fetishization of the victims. We have the super victims, we want to wake from that. But we really do want to see the other as to see the subjectivity of the other, including the model, the mediator. And when AI becomes the moderator, which is really the mediator, then it's easier a little bit to acknowledge the subjectivity of the other, because these things become more, they don't have the permanence that we would have with the concrete sort of, person-to-person relations, the triadic relations. God, yes, God is extremely important, because it's all, and forgive me, I don't want to sound agnostic or trivialize this, but God is one word that stands for all that was before us, and all that is here, and all that will be after us, and has to do with us in this journey of life and the afterlife. God is the very important word. It's the one word that stands for it. It's the most inclusive, the most meaningful, the richer word that we have with one word to describe everything that is so important and relevant to our existence, from beginning to end, from before us to after us, and for eternity. So God is important, but it's not the word.
It's not
vanity. Vanity, as in all, okay. Vanity, no, okay. So vanity is not the word. Professor Ansbach and Sandy, would you allow me to reveal the word?
Please reveal the word. Give us the revelation, Lefteri.
The word is maybe.
Maybe. Yeah,
maybe.
Now, doesn't Isos in Greek also mean the same?
Made Isos, which means
Isos,
made,
yeah.
because then, and that's the so, you know, AI can maybe destroy us or maybe save us, right? Like with all artifacts. And religion can, you know, did protect the Byzantine world order for about 800 years or so, 1,000 years, but also it was not enough, you know. So maybe, so when we cannot draw this distinction, when we cannot go from the maybe to the thousands of books, but we can, you know, we can summarize, and you know, the ultimate sort of summary is accepting the ambivalence, you know, the multiple meanings that things can have. And so we reach out to that language we use to create relations, to, you know, learn about relations, to enforce relations, and realize that the magic of our existence has to do with also with the semantics of that language, and that's really the great infrastructure we call culture and religion. And Girard very poignantly pointed to the idea that culture is developed to turn, you know, the threat of violence that could destroy us all into, you know, stable patterns of redemption and salvation.
So is the question of performativity versus constitutivity raised? In other words, language, there's a book by J.L. Austin, which is titled How to Do Things with Words. And when the answer is maybe, it's calling attention to the performative quality of the question itself. And maybe it's the impossibility of separating the performative from the descriptive or the constitutive that is getting raised here.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. So that's a great comment, great observation. And of course, we know that in a computational sense, we have something like Wittgenstein's idea of linguistic games, you know.
Right, right, yeah.
And there's normative language, there are games, you know, for giving orders, for analyzing. We professors like this analytic, you know, linguistic games. There's, and they, you know, it's life and life activities that create meaning. And I think the overarching theme of the need for stability through addressing this, you know, the spasms of violence that humans are capable of, you know, inventing means for redemption and salvation is also taking us to games, linguistic games for this. So, for example, John Bowlby's attachment theory, which I know some of the scholars spend, you know, it's a very rich literature that shows the relation of the infant to the mother in the first, you know, few months, the first year of life, and so forth. There's a lot of messes there. You know, there's a lot, and we have now a lot of evidence, a lot of, you know, cognitive, biocognitive evidence about the tracking that the child does of the mother's gaze, and, you know, the sort of learning that the body of the baby is separate from the body of the mother, and, you know, the anxieties and the things. So there's a lot of mimesis there. So it's building up to, you know, the mimesis that involves social relations, you know, and then the threat that this can produce for the community, for the society.
I'm again reading through the questions. One of the themes of the questions that have come up is the question of the new. How would an AI conceive of something new? How would something new, or what we could call emergent? I mean, there's a whole field of biology called emergent creation that has come up. Yeah.
So if you indulge with me, I will go to a little bit, to the presentation. So now I thought this question may come. So I have a few slides here that I hope you can see.
Mm-hmm.
it has to do, I'm skipping through them because we won't have to go, but it has to do with guidelines, with the general versus the specific. We need, if things are to have meaning, at least in the engineering world, they have to be measurable in some sense, comparable in some sense. So we have, in this work that we have done, so it's the capacity to generalize, which is a measure of intelligence, or some, so we can compare AI programs, AI machines, and based on their capacity to generalize. This is a little bit more sophisticated, or if you wish, different than Turing's test or John Searle's test. So generalization can happen in many different levels, and it's and here a lot of what, there's another frame of ideas that has to do with the repetition involved. So mimesis is within repetition, right? And the repetition, and we have this closed loop, there's at the societal level, but repetition is also involved in learning, and learning through mimesis. And Heinz Werner, some of you probably know better than I do, Heinz Werner came up, with the idea of microgenesis. And Professor Matei's lecture yesterday, he said that intelligence, AI, is mission directed, right?
Mission directed, right.
So Werner has a similar, more explicit teleological, framework, where he takes development to be to be microgenetic. So there is repetition, but we built on a previous structure. And I am really moving here because I want to stop here. It's what Werner, back in the 50s, Heinz Werner called the orthogenic principle. So again, as in the search for a theory of mind, we have a developmental process in the, in the refinement, the evolution of ideas. And whenever development occurs, it proceeds from a state of relatively low or lack of differentiation to a state of increasing differentiation, which is at the same time sort of hierarchically integrating. So things can become more differentiated, but at one level. At another level, they get subsumed to a hierarchy, right? So integration and differentiation can go together. And this is also in the Girardian closed loop, is also there, right? And we can see it historically in the sense that, the apostolic creed of the Roman world, the Gospels, is already sort of suggested in the Hebrew tradition, and it's already, building on and evolving from the ideas that we find in the Greek tradition, in the Greek tragedy, in Aeschylus's Oedipus Rex, for example. But so we have more differentiation. We finally reach the level where the integration is done through the idea that all victims are innocent, including, and as portrayed by the Son of God, right, is innocent. So, which means that death as the destructive mechanism for calming things down is pointless, because we're all going to die. Right? So better find ways for redemption, for salvation, for the other. So this is related to this idea of generalization. So we cannot really differentiate without integrating, which means having control over generalization. In a technical sense, this is a measure. Forgive me for going through this, but in a technical sense, we have some guidelines for for measuring intelligence and the intelligence of AI systems, of AI machines, and one of them is their capacity for generalization at a certain level. So we have to fix the level and then measure and see which program, which intelligent agent, for example, is capable of generalizing. The limited the generalization is not really inductive, the generalization is limited. It's limited. We're not there yet. As I said in the parable, the summarization is a very important problem, and no AI program can do it the way that a fifth grader can do it.
So if I can summarize another question that has been raised, is generalization the same thing as complexity? What is complexity in this context?
Yes. So this is, so these are again, different fields have different semantic, different substrates for this, right?
Right. Yeah.
So in engineering, we measure complexity by the kind of cause and effect relations that can be enumerated and sort of graded, right? So, the complex systems par excellence we observe and we know now are the biological systems, where a cause can lead to, many causes can lead to the same effect through different pathways. But all these causes are not necessarily, they're not all equal. We can have 1,000 causes for the same effect, but we can rank them as 1, 2, 3, and so forth. So the more of this, if I have a system where, like a thermostat, for example, where one cause can lead to one effect, the deviation from a certain set point, can start or the air conditioning or turn it off. I have a relatively simple system, a mechanism, if you wish. But if I have a microchip endowed, thermostatic, ambient control, and the microchip has a Wi-Fi is connected to the internet, and I can use my cell phone, my smartphone here to check the temperature of my apartment in Lafayette, and maybe sort of change the set point or monitor the pattern of electricity use or this or that, then I have a much more complex system, because now I have more possibilities for cause and effect relations. And I think in that sense, the Antikythera mechanism is a relatively simple computer, right? It doesn't have the storage, it doesn't even have the complexity of a simple, microprocessor. So complexity has to do and can be measured also with the capacity to generalize and to generalize function, to have more and more uses, so to speak. But these ideas, again, are in a technical context, because we want to have measurable things, we want to have comparable metrics and this and the other, they may be slightly different from the social sciences. In the context of human-machine relations, one of my favorite definitions of complexity is the following. We have categories. We have man, women, or social categories, let's say. And we have effects. And we have variabilities across and within categories. When variability within a category is greater than variability across different categories, then we have complexity.
Interesting.
Greater
yeah.
variability within, greater than variability across, right? Categories. Then we're talking about complex systems. And the greater this variability, and as you know, a lot of human prejudice comes from that, right? We have, we say Greeks are like that, but not all Greeks are like that, right? Or because variability within, Greeks and Bulgarians, whatever, is greater than variability across these categories, Greeks versus Bulgarians. So that's sort of the kind of complexity measures that increasingly we will bring to AI also.
So another theme that has come up in the question panel is variously articulated as ambivalence or ambiguity. How do AIs handle ambiguity or ambivalence? And with that, I'm thinking of the movie, I think it was called War Games, where the computer said, how about a nice game of chess? Because they're trying to, it's a game you can't win, and then it finally backs off at the end. But I mean, but the question of ambivalence, I guess, would be the how does would be the central issue here. How do computers handle ambivalence? Can computers, I'll use a Jewish term, take a Sabbath?
Okay, so this is it's a great question, because really our capacity to adapt to computers is far greater than the capacity of computers to adapt to humans.
Right.
So we take a Sabbath, or we give them a Sabbath, right?
Yeah, right, yeah.
So maybe one day it will be possible. I don't want to say that, computers cannot grow to have social, to be more autonomous, because it's happening in some ways. And also not say that these are metaphysical problems that cannot be studied, investigated, or imagined. But the ambivalence, the ambiguity is extremely important for the economy of computation and computing systems, right? We manage computation, the economy of computation, through this ambivalence, through the fuzziness of, fuzziness, the way we create categories. We could probably distinguish 10 million colors with our eyes, but we don't need to hold that detail. It's what Chomsky calls discrete infinity. We only need a finite set of categories to do very sophisticated things. We can still paint with 1 million or 10 million colors, but we don't need more than 3 or 4 or 5 categories for color. And actually, if you're Greek, if you're Greek, in the Greek language, you have probably a dozen names and a dozen categories for blue. It's not enough to say blue. You have to say, is it blue like the sea? Is it the Sea of the Aegean or the Ionian Sea? Blue like the sky, the cloud sea, all of these, blue like, the sky in the winter, because, this blue sort of nuances were important for the safety of the Greek seamen, who take to the sea, right? You'd be out of the gene pool in no time if you misjudge the sea. It always looks calm and seductive in the port, but once you turn around the cave, you may be gone. So this is, so ambivalence, ambiguity are very important. We have certain technical definitions for how to measure them and how to use them. There's a whole body of AI called fuzzy systems and fuzzy logic, which is very important, very, very important, because it acknowledges this nature, the need to handle, to manage complexity of computation, the economy of computation, basically, by creating, useful categories and avoid the pitfall of naming everything and having a category for everything sensible or observable. But a lot of this is, again, meaningful through the culture we have. We have cultures also in the scientific communities. We have cultures in the social sciences. We have culture in the broader sense. A lot of these cultures are infrastructures or systems for helping us to generate meaning, a meaning that can be making our conversations meaningful, right? And therefore our learning and our capacity to innovate, to produce singularities and things that at the moment AI systems cannot really do. But we can do much more of that through them.
Lefteri, here's a slightly different question. It's a question posed by Bernadette Ward. Can human beings become alienated because of AI? She writes, is there not a risk that rather than giving us real access to information that will save us from disasters, AI can actually simply alienate people from real things, create fictional meanings that insulate us from the fundamental reality we need to desire good for others.
Yes. It may
Yeah.
be.
Right. Maybe.
That's something that we are worrying about. You know, we do see these patterns. We do see this. I mean, I alluded to in my presentation. You know, I think some of these color revolutions are. Yes,
Right.
maybe the CIA is trying to take advantage of them, but maybe
Right.
not really generating them. You know, yes, is it? You know, the Greeks had a war for people who lived outside of public involvement, of public concerns. They called them idiots. You know, people who did not share the agonies of the day, the agonies of the era. And definitely, this is an agony, you know, we should really look at very closely, because, you know, people do become more self-absorbed, more idiotic in their, you know, they're isolated, they're alienated. You know, Herbert Marcuse's idea of alienation back in the 60s, which, you know, we know is a very popular thing, you know, is far more pervasive and far more, you know, ominous in the consumer society of the day than in the working class, I mean, than the class relations, the way that the neo-Marxists, you know, sort of visualize them in the post-World War II situation. So yes, this is it. And how this leads to, so in, you know, this is my gut feeling. It's not a scientific observation, but we may have more mental illness to manage and to worry about as we move into the future with this, you know, but maybe this is a fear, right? This is, I see the young babies now, they're much more capable of using their finger to get something from a smartphone than, you know,
than writing.
Right, developing these skills. We don't really know. I think we are in a kind of terra incognita. It could very well be that these things are real and they're ominous and they're, you know, something that the scholars investigate and study, if anything, to give us enough time and warning to look at them, you know, realistically and pragmatically as threats to our society.
One of the questioners raises, this is Nikolai Blasko, raises the reference to the film Her. I don't know if you've seen the film Her, in which a man falls in love with an operating system, and played by the voice of Scarlett Johansson in the film Her, H-E-R.
Yes. Yeah, I think this is, you know, this anthropomorphic relations, I mean, the relation of humans with anthropomorphic technology, right, is there because of the power of our imagination. Now, can the systems get close enough? Actually, there is a lot of robotics literature for this. Human beings habituate much faster with anthropomorphic, you know, artifacts.
Right.
Because they don't actually produce novelty, right? So, you know, human beings habituate. You get tired of, you know, of using a robot that looks like human and talks to you like human. You know, after a while, you just don't pay attention. You know. Now, I think it's an interesting question for, you know, the psychological or the psychiatric literature.
Yes, psychiatric, exactly. Right. Can AI mourn? Can AIs mourn, deal with death of others?
Right. This is, others can use AI to deal with death of others, but I don't think, you know, this is the capacity. So they're mediators, but in a way they're safe mediators because they cannot really become rivals.
Yes, right.
You know, you know, so the sense, yes, you know, the laws of thermodynamics are there. AIs have more capacity to evolve than, let's say, a pump or or an electric circuit, right, which operates within design parameters, the design envelopes, as we call them. Right. So AIs have more capacity to evolve. And as discussed a little earlier, AIs have more, machines can made to learn from their mistakes, can be made to learn from their mistakes, unlike humans.
Yeah.
But narrow range of these things, it's not, I think, yet to the point where we can talk about consciousness, although we learn a lot about our own limitations or our own
right
about consciousness, right, or our own ignorance, if you wish, if you permit me the term, because as I said, we don't have a theory of mind. We don't really have a comprehensive, theory of mind. So we proceed in the hope of learning more and more, and our capacity to imagine is far greater than our capacity to explain. But then, these two can work together to create much more, maybe even our own mathematical tools need to be revisited, or our paradigmatic sort of frameworks need to be revised, or we need to go into new paradigms to examine these questions. So maybe.
Maybe.
I don't really know at this point. We don't know. We really do not know. So it's all maybe. It's really.
Yeah. There's a moment. Mark Ansbach gave a paper on Oedipus yesterday, and I wrote an essay on Oedipus. There's a certain moment in Sophocles' play in which the chorus turns to Oedipus and says, "Generations of men, you are," I believe the Greek is "isa ta meiden," equal to nothing.
Right.
It seems to me relevant to how can something be equal to nothing? And the suggestion that I made after reading Girard's work was that it's a scapegoat. The scapegoat is precisely both something and nothing at the same time. It's the paradigma. It's the example. It's the one that's also the many. So I guess what it leads to is the question of scapegoating. How are we to conceive of AI in terms of scapegoating? Does the safety guarantee us against AI doing what, for example, in some of the disaster movies, the movies with Arnold Schwarzenegger, ganging up on human beings? Is AI safe? Can AI be? I mean, it can be used to be not-safe, but is AI in itself safe? So
AI can fail, that creates, it's not safe in that sense. Now, the intentional, purposeful sort of self-initiated from an AI program, we're not there yet. But it can fail, and failure can be anthropomorphically seen as, intention to do harm, right?
Right. Yeah. Anthropomorphically. Yeah.
Exactly. But it's a great example of Girard's scapegoating. We can definitely scapegoat AI. We can say that it will, it's the cause of all of our instabilities. Our children are not learning because they play too much with video games or machines and this and the other. We can get a lot of scapegoating of technology, but that's also where the salvation may lie. So, soteriology can also emerge out of the capacity to care for great global commons in a way that is erudite, that requires more education, more responsibility, more consciousness of the need to avoid futile, destructive things happening, right? Nobody gains, but it's a hard thing to convince people not to scapegoat and destroy, even though they may deify, like they don't do it in Oedipus case, but Dionysius definitely, right? They cut him to pieces, So scapegoating is with AI also, and with technology in general, and medicine too, just you name it, right? And nuclear for sure, nuclear is one of the favorite scapegoats, although even though you may say that, none of our medical great innovations would have happened without particle physics. Right. But in a lot of hospitals, remove the word nuclear and put information or something else, right? Because people are scared, even, because of the scapegoating thing,
Lefteri, thank you so much for your entrance into the conference and entrance into Girardian thinking. I think you have given us an amazing amount to consider, and I have a feeling that we've made in your talk an advance today in Girardian thinking about AI. So I ask all of you to applaud our speaker, and we will conclude our session for today. Thank you very much.
Sandy, thank you, Mark, and thank you all
Thank you
for putting up with me.
Thank you.
Thank you.